Kendra Reiber and Mick Smith pull back the curtain and explore stories that put the heart-wrenching puzzle pieces together with inspiring stories, notable experts, and actionable tips. Let the healing begin. Welcome once again. This is The Aftermath, and I would be Mick Smith with Kendra Reiber, and we were just chatting before we started, and this is our first year anniversary. We started on the 23rd of September. Can you believe it? It's more than a year, Kendra.
It's crazy. You know what? And we've never met in person. And I'm sure people are a little shocked by that, but we're on opposite ends of the United States. We've never met in person.
Definitely on the left coast, but way back when I was on the East Coast too, and I've traveled all over, been to all 50 states. I've been to Ohio. It's a great state. So
Yes.
maybe another day.
Yes.
Another feature, since we did come up with our first year anniversary, we are going back and taking a look at both our sponsors and our supporters. So what we're going to do is to talk a little bit about what they have been doing in their last year. So Debbie Griffiths, we interviewed back some time ago, and it was actually good timing because she's very concerned about domestic violence. And with October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, she has written her book, which you haven't got. You need to get hold of it. It's called Torched, and 50% of her book sale profits are donated to the Nicole Sinkool Fund Foundation, raising awareness of red flags about gaslighting, and that's what her book is about. She also will offer autographed copies of Torched at brokentoboldness.com. That's brokentoboldness.com, also available on Amazon. And she's also got another book coming. See how active she is. Pre-order collaboration on Mission Hope Volume 2. So that is what she's been doing. And we're always looking for sponsors and supporters. And that would be one person now after a year. Today, we have Cathy Himlin, LMFT, LPCC. So the first thing I see when I see all those letters must be a really worthwhile person to talk to with all those things behind her name. So she's a sought-after expert supporting child-based focused and focusing parenting on legal professionals in high conflict cases. She's the president and CEO of Family Connections Therapy and founder of Himlin Consulting. And so with that, let's welcome Cathy to the program. Hi, Cathy.
Welcome, Cathy. We're so excited to have you and talk today. So
Thank
it's
you.
crazy that this topic of divorce and custody and high conflict custody battles and healing is such at a high need out there that people are listening that we've been able to create enough content for a year and we're still going.
We call it an epidemic, so I think that makes sense when we call it that.
Yes.
Yeah, it seems to have gotten even worse since COVID and the pandemic. So things have escalated for sure.
Well, we've got some questions for you, so I'd like to field some of those. And one of the questions that we had, and it's one that we ask a lot of people too, if you could really expound a little bit on parental alienation. What is it, and how does it impact family dynamics? We'd really like to hear what you have to say.
Sure. I'm not sure what the general definition is, but from how I work with it, it's generally when you have one of the parents or maybe some of the family or other people that are influencing a child to not see the other parent or not see the other parent as much. And it's not necessarily in a conscious way. Sometimes it's just from their own trauma, grief, and all these other reasons that this happens. But it's basically, turning a child against another parent.
Can it just be a parent or can it be part of a whole side of their family?
Right. Like I think I said, I don't know if I did, but extended family, definitely. It could be a whole group. It could be just a grandparent or an aunt and uncle too. They could also solicit family members, not family members, but family friends that could come in and, support that whole process as well. And point out all the negative things about one parent is basically what they tend to do or allude to it.
And in the question, we've asked like family dynamic. So I don't know about you, but sometimes my eyes glaze over. What does that mean when we say family dynamics? What is the family dynamic? And could you expound a little bit on that?
Sure. A family dynamic, and how I like to think of it, it's just how we interact with each other in a family. It's how the parent-child dynamic is, what that relationship looks like how we respond to each other. So dynamic is sort of interactive. the family as a general, depending on the members of it, have their own, if you can put my hands up here, their own dynamic. I always say it's sort of like another a being up here. It sort of sounds weird with little strings and everyone's sort of connected. And when someone moves or does something, we're all like connected in a dynamic. We're all impacted in some way.
And that helps me because there's one of the things or the reason I asked this question personally is because if people ask me about my family dynamics, I feel very fortunate, intact family, and mom was very reserved, dad was reserved, my sister was, I am. So when I hear this, I don't quite understand because everyone was really even keeled.
Mhm.
We said a dynamic, it was just calm and even keeled dynamic. So nice.
Yeah.
You know,
So in parental alienation, sometimes a parent can be separated for a long period of time, or it could be a short amount of time. And when you say short, some parents think if they haven't seen their kids in a week or two, but I'm talking short as in maybe a couple months, and long term, maybe 10 years, right?
Right.
So when we think about that, and I know this is a loaded question, so maybe you want to break it up into segments of maybe 6 months or a couple years and then long term. But what are some of the parenting skills that you can use to attempt to reconnect with your child after you've been alienated from them?
Well, I believe in the windows of time. So it depends. Like if it's a short term separation, then you might have more opportunities. You haven't been totally cut off. So in those windows of time, the thing that helps the most is to reach the child where they're at, to try to check in, become curious, using empathetic skills and understand their viewpoint and how they're feeling in that moment. If you go, a lot of times parents are naturally feeling defensive, they're feeling hurt, they're grieving the fact they haven't seen their child, even if it's been a couple of weeks, because there's a perceived threat that it could be longer. And so they come in and they're agitated, they're angry, they're depressed, and they're like that in front of their child instead of being emotionally, available to them. And it's understandable because this is a horrible thing to go through. And there's a process that parents go through in their grief and feelings of losing their children. But if they can work on that individually, and when they see their children come in and just try to be emotionally available, is basically what that would be.
So that's short term. What about longer term? And how do you keep that connection, or how do you reconnect, or what are some of those skills you can use?
Sure. Again, it depends on your exposure. So if you're able to see your children, you have all those opportunities, just those windows of opportunity, even if it's just like 15 minutes in passing at a ceremony, like a graduation ceremony, or maybe a birthday or something, you're allowed to be around your child. If it's that minimal, then you can do something to say how much you love that child and that you'll be there for them and that you are interested in where they're at. I mean, it's completely focusing on them. If it's something where you don't have contact, that would be send a text. Texting gets, maybe ignored, maybe send a letter, an email, but just reaching out to them in some way would be helpful so they can see that you still want to be with them. Because even though they're rejecting you in this moment, later on, they may look back and wonder, where were you? And not understand what happened. So
Mhm.
making attempts is important.
how does reunification conjoint therapy help in attachment parenting focused on emotional connection between parent and child? And that's really a mouthful. So
It
I
is.
need to know what reunification conjoint therapy is. It's not my field. Attachment parenting, and maybe you could unpack that a little bit.
Okay. In our area, from San Diego right now, anyways, we talk about conjoint therapy. And reunification therapy is a term that's used in other counties and other states. So, because my county uses conjoint court therapy as what is really reunification therapy, it's the same thing. But what that is that I work with children who don't want to see their parent, whatever the reason. It could be due to alienation, parental alienation. It could be other reasons that are also involved. And we're trying to reunify or repair that relationship. So the parent child relationship that's been broken. And the way I approach it, again, is from an attachment basis. And I use what's called emotion coaching. And I've gotten that from Emotional Focused Family Therapy by Adele LaFrance. And it teaches parents in a very practical way of how to set up a script, so to speak. And it doesn't have to be like you read a script necessarily, but you can. It sets up a script to where you learn how to validate your child's emotions. You can even validate what's called a false narrative as well, without admitting that what they say you did, you did. You just validate the feelings. You focus on the feelings aspect of it because they really want to be seen and they want to be heard. They want to be understood. So when they get that from you, it sort of disarms them sometimes. So validating and showing empathy for how they're feeling about what they're going through, if that makes sense. So that's how I apply the attachment parenting to that.
It does make sense. And is this something that the court orders? And is this something that then a therapist is assisting parents with? And how does that work out? Does that mean you meet as a group? Do you meet one-on-one or a combination? How does that work in the practical scheme of things?
Sure. The majority of my cases are court ordered or court advised. Sometimes they don't make it a full court order suggested. And sometimes people seek this type of therapy out before they even get to court because they're trying to prevent this from happening.
What is this in terms of practical skills? Is this something where you meet with the parents and
Oh,
the
right.
child and separately, or how does that work in practical terms?
Sure. It's the way I've been doing it because before when I started, I would just put everyone together in the room and just do family therapy like I learned, a long time ago, training in family therapy. And what I found is that doesn't work because if we don't prepare the parent ahead of time and we put them together, then the parent could be angry, sad, frustrated, anxious, and then the child's walking in going, I'm not dealing with this. So I've stopped that. And
Mhm.
what we do is I don't put both the parents in the room together. And I refer to the parent who's been rejected as the peripheral parent. And that's the parent who's sort of on the periphery of the child's life right now. I find that nicer than some other words that I've heard. We talk about this parent and the central parent who's in the center of the child's life right now. I'm focused mainly with the peripheral parent and the child who's rejecting that parent. So I have in the first stage, I meet with the child alone to find out why they're rejecting the parent or what their complaints are. What I actually say is, what do you want different with this? And try to understand them and gain rapport. The second stage I do is work with the peripheral parent, the one who's been rejected, individually and try to help them just with me so I can take the initial reaction from them, what's going on with their child and how the child's presenting it. So that's two stages, and they can be running, simultaneously on different days or different sessions that I have. So I'm trying to really explore the child, how they're feeling and what's going on with them. And then I'm translating for the parent. And then I teach them emotion coaching and teach them how to reach their child to acknowledge these things that have happened over here. And we call them attachment ruptures. So there's been breaks in the relationship, things that have happened that have upset that child so much that they're pushing the parent away. And so I'm having that parent address those directly when we get to conjoint, which is stage 3. And then I put them in the room together and they've already worked on their scripts. I role play with the parents. I help guide them on how to, make their answers or their addressing the issues very concise because sometimes they want to write like big long letters of things and kids won't sit there for all that. So we need to make it concise and to the point. And then when we're able to get in the session for conjoint and reunification therapy, then the parents feel confident. They have a new tool, they have language, they can talk to their kids in a way that the kids haven't heard before sometimes. And it's a much more positive introduction to this therapy than how I used to do it. It was harder. There's too many raw emotions the other way. This way we're prepping both sides before we put them together. If that makes sense. I hope that
It makes a
explains it.
lot of sense. And really, I think you're ahead of the curve. Mick, I can speak, I think for both of us, we've never heard this type of reunification therapy or what do we call it? Conjoint therapy, right? I don't think it's ever been addressed like this. So a lot of the nation isn't doing it this way.
No.
And so I think it's absolutely amazing. You're giving the tools, you're prepping both sides, and then you're bringing them together so that both sides kind of understand where the other's coming from. So how long does that take?
You mean the total of sessions, how long it
Yes.
takes?
Yes, roughly. And I know it probably ranges from where everybody's at, but are we talking 6 months? Are we talking 2 years? What are we looking at?
Right. With the way I've been doing it recently, it's anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. If it's a very intense case and I've got multiple siblings, or there's just, domestic, when you add on domestic violence, or, substance use, or maybe even some abuse, those take much longer because that's more complex trauma to deal with. And some those are less apt to be successful as well.
Mhm.
But these cases, I take like about 5 sessions with a parent alone, 2 to 3 or 5, depending on the anxiety level or anger level of the child, trying to help calm them down and regulate them so we can do it. And then when we get to the conjoint phase, that could be about, 5, 6 weeks in. And then that part takes about 2 to 3 months to 6 months, depending. It so depends on so many things, like how far down the path has the child been influenced by the other parent, if that's really the issue. There's so many other issues. Is the peripheral parent able to sit there without being emotionally reactive to the co-parent who's not in the room? Because they hear a narrative come out of the child's mouth and then they get defensive.
Mhm.
And so it's hard to like calm that down, and we take a lot of breaks when things like that happen. I have a room that the children can just get up and walk out of my room and go to another room so they can take an emotional break. I stop the session if it gets out of control, if I even see it's going that way. So if that starts happening, those cases take a lot longer. But 3 to 6 months, and then plus for the domestic violence and abuse cases.
Sure. Not unreasonable.
And
So,
and attachment parenting, I kind of wrap my head around this. Attachment parenting, that refers to the alienated parent. Is that similar to reunification, to reattach
Yeah.
alienated parent to the child or children? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so they have their attachment with each other, their relationship's been broken or ruptured. And so it's to help repair that so they're back together again, because the parents are usually the primary attachment figure in any, parent-child relationship. Both parents can be, or at least one is, and some degree the other. And when that's broken, then it's so hard to get it back because the child's hurting so much and they're needing something from that parent to repair. Sometimes it's almost too late if people wait a year, 2 years to do reunification therapy, though. And I get a lot of those cases too, because this rupture, this pain that's happened for this child has just gotten bigger. It's just grown because we've never addressed it.
mhm,
So yeah, if that explains it
mhm.
for you.
And it does. And then just to follow up on areas, because I said both Kendra and I think this is kind of a new concept for us. And is this something that is in San Diego area? Is this something in California, or are there places in the country where this is more or less prevalent than others?
Which part? The therapy?
Yes, that therapy that you're describing, this reunification and conjoint therapy.
I've heard it across the country. My approach to it, I haven't heard very many people or anybody doing this particular approach, which is why I'm starting a book about the whole thing right now. I actually started writing it 2 weeks ago about how to reach children in this way. The reunification therapy, it's just named different things again, but different courts. I've seen it ordered across the country because I have a parenting class as well. And I've worked with parents in different states that are in the middle of reunification therapy with their therapist, is that's what they call it. And they come to my class to help learn, how to be more successful in that therapy.
Mhm. So, switching gears just a little bit, what is resist refuse dynamics and how does it impact the relationship between a child and a parent?
The resist refuse dynamic is just basically the child is resisting or refusing to see that parent. And so it's just another way of saying either not necessarily alienation is happening, but the child is pushing the parent away. And so when that's happening, it's really difficult to repair that relationship. So
Mhm.
it's pretty much the same thing. It's just a statement that I found in the literature that's pretty common that a lot of the researchers are using out there.
So,
Yeah.
can the reason the child might be pushing the parent away, can that be justified or unjustified? Like, could that be many reasons that they're pushing them away?
Yes, could be justified or unjustified. And the unjustified, there's so many reasons. So many. Justified, You want me to go into that? Because I will.
Yeah,
Justify,
yeah.
yeah,
Let's
justified reasons, as it's stated in the literature, is any type of like abuse or threat where the child has felt threatened or scared. If they've witnessed domestic violence, if they've been present during it, if they've been in a car when a parent has been drinking and get in a car accident and they're aware that their parent is drunk or inebriated, and if there's any abuse, of course, that's another justified reason. Others are on the fence for some people, but I really do think that emotional abuse or emotional very heightened emotions in the house can be another justified reason. If there's any verbal threats and things like that, that can also be, a justified reason. So anything that's perceived as a either immediate danger or a possible danger can really impact a child. And those are the cases that are very difficult to work with because there's real stuff there that we
So
need to work through.
when we talk about abuse, can you go into what might be parenting? Some parents believe in spanking or, if their child is physical with them, whether they're biting, they're kicking, they're screaming, they're punching their parent, right? So discipline
Mhm.
versus physical abuse.
Well, there's some definitions out there and they keep changing it, but discipline, I mean, spanking in and of itself is not considered abuse.
Mhm.
Spanking can turn into abuse if you leave a mark or some sort of damage is done, of course, to a child. But spanking can also make a child not want to be around a parent if there was one parent spanking, right? And the word spanking is defined so differently by so many different people. It could be a light slap on someone's rear, or I've even seen someone define it as hitting on the shoulder or the head was considered a spanking. So it really depends on that person's definition of spanking.
And can maybe one parent in a divorce could be more the disciplinarian than the other. And so the one that is doing more of the disciplining, could that be perceived as fear or be changed into, where they might be fearful that it might become physical abuse by the other parent?
The other parent fearing that it'll turn into physical abuse. Yes.
Yes, or initiate that in the child and creating that fear in the child.
Yes, absolutely. That does happen. I see that quite a bit. So if there's one parent who does most of the discipline, even if it isn't physical discipline, the other parent could be threatened that when that child's left alone with that parent, it might go farther. And then that is just a contagious emotion, that anxiety and sense of threat that gets transferred onto the child, and not necessarily on purpose either. I don't think a lot of people aren't aware how much anxiety is contagious, how much those fears are contagious. I've watched cases, just not to divert off this, but of parents who have actually created, you could see almost created a phobia in a child by having a reaction to a stimuli of some sort, like an insect, and having a big reaction to the insect. And now the child's afraid of the insect because the parent was afraid of the insect. So it's very contagious. Emotions are, and especially anxiety, that can impact them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, this kind of makes sense here because this was the next question we were thinking of. How does anxiety impact children, and what is the effect of children soaking up parents' emotions like a sponge? Because definitely kids do act like sponges. They hear and listen to everything that goes by.
And we did not plan that. So you walked right into that,
Yeah.
Kathy. That was like the next perfect thing we were going to talk about.
That's great. Well, I mean, just in general, I think a lot of emotions they're contagious. If you've been around, I'll just say that again. I'm sure you too have been around someone who has anxiety. And if someone's having a panic attack or some high level of anxiety, people actually start to feel it too. You could start to feel it in your own body, and you're like, gosh, why am I getting a little anxious? That's the person that's anxious. But you're feeling it because we register other people's emotions a lot of times. As therapists, we just do because we're trained to understand them and recognize nonverbals, but it's the nonverbals, it's the tone of voice and all that. So when we give danger cues to children, even teenagers, and you give it to them over and over and over, they're going to eventually associate this parent, perhaps like if this one parent who's anxious about the other parent, they're just going to associate. And even though there's nothing spoken, doesn't have to be something spoken, they'll make that association, And then they're anxious and they're like, gosh, if mom or dad are anxious about the other parent, then that means I should be, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. There's something to fear. And I have a good example of this. Well, I have quite a few, but one of them was this one kiddo didn't, she kept coming to me. It was one of my cases, or a long time ago, a very long time ago. And the parent and the child were in a supervised visitation situation. And simply because they were in a supervised visitation situation, that child was given the message that there was something wrong and something for her to fear. And she kept asking me, what happened? Did something happen to me? I want to know, because why do I have to have a supervisor? There must be something wrong, or I'd be able to see my parent without a supervisor. Young kid. So, and then there was anxiety from the other parent as well about transitions. Would that supervision happen even though there's a supervisor there? So that's an example how they just sort of try to put things together and make sense of it, and they're being influenced by whoever's around them. They jump to their own conclusions sometimes about what's going on.
And this kind of jumps back, Cathy, to what we were talking about before, but how does permissive parenting impact the family dynamics, and what damage does it cause?
Sure. You've got one parent who is permissive in that they let them do whatever they want. So they can eat McDonald's for every meal. Now, that's sort of exaggerating, I'm sure, but we'll just exaggerate for now. They can eat McDonald's. They can have unlimited screen time. They stay up to whatever hours they want because no one's paying attention to that. They don't have to do their homework. If they want to walk out the door and go to the store, hang out with a friend, they can do that. This could be anywhere from ages 9, 10 and up. I've seen this young kids even. And then you've got the other parent who's a little more structured, who wants to have nutrition for their child, who wants to set limits on their phone, set limits on their screen time, gives them a bedtime, has chores for them to do, goodness sakes, and has them do homework before they're able to do play dates or hang out with their friends if they're older. Mm-hmm. So which parent is the child going to want to be with?
Right. Who?
So
yeah, I know who I would want to be with. Of course, I'm going to go with the fun parent that's going to let me do whatever I want because I don't want structure. But little do they realize that that structured parent is probably what they need in order to set their values and become the person they really are meant to be in the world.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that it's really, really sad of the cases I've seen that have this impacting them.
And that happens in a marriage, right? I mean, that probably is in a marriage dynamic, right? You're going to have a mom and a dad that is very different in the way that they parent. But then when they split up, it only just makes it worse. And I'm sure maybe both sides are even take it to the extreme on the side that they favor anyways, right? The structured parent's going to want even more structure. And the permissive one's going to be like, oh, I'll be the fun parent. You'll want to be with me a little bit more, right?
Yes.
So I think that just makes it worse.
Yes. And then with the structured parents, sometimes they get anxious and they go, oh my gosh, we got to really structure this kid. And then that just pushes them away. Yes. And they're feeling helpless in the situation and they can't seem to rein things in because there's no co-parenting relationship going on, or healthy one anyways, at the time. Yeah. With, doggies being bought and bunnies being bought and birds and guinea pigs and too.
Yes.
That always influences them.
Yes. Yes. And over COVID, right? Everybody bought a pet. And then COVID's over and they're like, what are we going to do with this pet now? Yes. Not thinking.
I've got to kind of wonder what this phrase is, permissive parenting, because I'm from a generation where it didn't exist. So permissive parenting to me seems like just the opposite, because it does fall in this train of thought of when you have a split, isn't the lack of permissiveness is what needed in a broken relationship, right? I mean, if things are not going well, the more structure you can provide, as unpopular as it might be, are probably what the children need. And I say this because I have some reflection. I used to volunteer at Central Juvenile Hall in Los Angeles with gang kids. And I think the odd thing was they need more structure, not less, when there's something broken. Even if they don't know they need it, that is definitely what they need. And curious on what your thoughts are on this topic.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the painful part of watching that. You've got the one parent who recognizes that children, like what you're saying, Mac, is they need structure. They'll be calmer if they have structure, predictability, and they can see what's going to happen next. And like who's house it's going to be in. And when I'm working with these families, one thing I recommend, especially for small children that can't track time and days very well, is we have calendars in both houses so they can see with stickers that they buy or their parents get them, or little drawings so they can see which house they're going to next. That's a type of structure that really brings calm, to a child. So you're right. It would be so much better if there was some sort of structure, and really if both parents could work together and do similar things in each home instead of having a 2 a.m. bedtime versus a 9 p.m. bedtime, or, the junk food versus a healthier food and all those things. Structure would actually help a lot if we could get both parents to do something that they would agree to together.
Sure. How does the hidden grief of parents, and we had a couple episodes on grief, so that's a pretty interesting topic as well. How does the hidden grief of parents and children impact the family dynamics?
Sure, so much. One of the things that I was noticing, the grief that parents go through, the type of grief that I think's been contributing to what looks like parental alienation, because I was trying to understand why is this going on? I don't believe that the parents, or the majority of the parents, or I'm not sure, I shouldn't say majority or anything, but some of the parents, I'll say that. I don't believe that they're doing it on purpose. I really do think that they have a lot of unresolved trauma. They have grief. And the grief that I see, like, for instance, a primary caretaker in an intact family, the one who's seen the child more, whether they work or not, they're around the child more. Let's say 80% of the time, just to say a number. When we go through the divorce process or a custody dispute, the courts, at least in our area, tend to try to go closer to 50-50. So when that parent is faced with that custody change, they're now losing 30% of that time. And so that's like seriously a loss of time with that child they're used to, whether they're like, they were the ones that always picked them up from school. They're the ones who always sat down and did homework. They took them to gymnastics or a ball game or something. They're the ones who did that more because their schedule was flexible, or they were stay-at-home parents. So that's a grief that they're just grieving time. It's just very simple. They don't realize it, and then they fight, to get more time or to prevent the other parent to have more time. So that's I think, a grief they go through. And just grieving the family unit and relationship, that's an obvious one. Like, depending on how harsh the breakup was, just grieving all of that. And then the relocation, they have to get a new place of residence or stay in the place they were for a little bit before they sell the home. It's just grieving what your life was, and that type of thing, if it's not being addressed, is something that will leak onto the children because they're going through their own grief. And then that just makes it really emotional and impacts where children decide to go, or where the children are more comfortable being at. For the children, I think a lot of what they go through too, again, is grieving time with one parent. That I just see that so much lately. It just hit me over the head lately of how that happens. They don't get to see the same friends. Like, they have to move schools. So they're having to maybe move schools. They may get cut out of one of their parents' families, so they don't get to see grandma and grandpa on one side of the family. Their support system gets completely disrupted. And just their friend group could be completely disrupted as well. So there's so many different things like that impact them individually that I think contributes to what appears to be parental alienation, or could be adding to it, as far as the family dynamics. It's a mess. It's a mess. And I think that, to put it simply, and I think what needs to happen is we really need to go in, and instead of allowing, I wish we could do this in the court system, instead of jumping straight into a divorce or custody dispute in court and getting into litigation, that we sit down and see, how can we support this family better emotionally, and see how we can regulate their emotions first before they make these big decisions about money, or how often a child visits or spends parenting time with which parent, and all these things, and where are they moving. They're huge decisions to make, and they're making them in the midst of this messy emotional situation, and they're making decisions that most likely aren't in the best interest of the family in the long term, and may not be in the best interest of the child's developmental and emotional needs in that moment. So
I think you nailed it, Cathy. We just really need to step back and focus on the children and the needs of the family emotionally, psychologically, versus just, I'm going to go file for divorce. And then you get all of these attorneys involved and you get the court system involved, and it just gets really messy, as you said, right? And there's a lot of money involved, and then everybody gets greedy, and then you just see more time added on, longer
Right.
extended divorces. Then you have reunification therapists and custody evaluators and, a separate therapists for everybody else. But if we would come together first before we have to go to court, I think a lot of things would be solved. So I really like what you said. I think Sweden's actually doing this. They already have 50-50. They have to come to an agreement, and they can't just
Nice.
go to court. So, and it's
Nice.
impacting the court systems. They're not seeing as much criminal in court or accusations of abuse. And they're also not seeing as much in their divorce cases as far as fighting over custody because of that, because they just start 50-50 and they just say, look, we got to figure it out. We got to do the best for the family. And I think they have a better handle on it than anybody else in the world.
That's beautiful. That would help. That would be a way to help solve a lot of these problems. It would just calm the emotional part down, just without helping support anybody, because they don't have a choice.
Right.
They don't have a choice. Because when we have, and I actually enjoy working with attorneys. I help train them and know quite a few, but there is some out there, because they're human beings. And, unlike with therapists, not saying that all therapists are calm and rational either, but most of us try. We have to do our own work. We have to go to therapy and work on our own stuff so we don't leak it into our session with our clients. But unfortunately, when family law attorneys or other attorneys, I suppose, but I'm talking about family law now, when they go and represent these clients, the parents, their emotions are in the way. So if we're having any of these dynamics, and I think I heard you two talk about this on another show as well, that they add their own issues onto it, and then it just blows it up bigger than it really needs to be. And there's no rational thought, no reason, and no conversation. It's just allegations thrown back and forth, at each other.
Yes.
And it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary. And it confuses the judge, the bench officer. They're sitting there going, what is going on? And they can't tell where the truth lies, and how do they even do their job if they're not being fed accurate information sometimes.
Yeah. And the longer that the cases are probably in court, I'm relating back to what you said, where the anxiety is contagious. The longer the cases are in court, the more it's drug out, and the parents have to go through that. That affects the children. So it makes it even worse for that amount of time.
Yeah. I even, sometimes in my work, if I can't give legal advice because I'm not an attorney, but what I will say to some of my parents is, if you're going to do reunification therapy and we're going to try to help repair this relationship, can you please table your litigation? Can you just take a pause for 6 months and not do anything, and just let me do my job? And let's see how we can get this fixed first. And then maybe they'll be more civil, because there won't be, as much of a threat. Again, giving the parents and the children services first. And some people have done it, and sometimes it's actually worked out nicely. They rarely can, because they just want to fight. They want to get what they need for themselves, and they're just so wrapped up in it. But again, if we could just set that stuff aside so the family can heal first.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. Cathy, it's been absolutely a pleasure speaking with you. I've learned so much. I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to do this podcast and meet people like yourself, and especially when you're across the country from me, but you're over by Mick. I think you've made a lot of good points that we haven't heard in the past year. So do you work with anybody outside of California? Or are you restricted to California, or do you do anything virtual?
Well, I'm restricted for therapy in California. And that's why I created my other company, Himlin Consulting, because that is where I do all my education and consulting. So when I'm doing therapy with a family, that I'm sort of stuck in California, unless I got licensed other places, which is not that easy to do. But for my parenting class and for consultation, I can work with parents. I can work with parents. I just can't do therapy. So that's why I'm able to do parenting across the country, consulting with parents who need help, and strategizing how to overcome some of the things that are going on in their case or in their situation with their family. Yeah, I can definitely work with anybody.
Great. So that's Himlin Consulting, Himlin.
Thank you.
Yes. And then you were talking about a book. So hopefully, maybe you have a book coming out. Where should we look for that or keep posted? I mean, I know you have a LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else that we should look for it?
I'm going to be making a page for it, I think, eventually. I've just started writing it, and it does take time. I'm going to do it more of the traditional way, so it may be like about a year. But I'm going to basically be writing, for parents who want contact with their children but have been rejected. And I'll be having a page on my website, himlinconsulting.com.
Wonderful. So people can follow the progress there.
Yeah.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it, Cathy.
Thank you both.
Knowledge. All those big questions and big terms we threw at you did them really well.
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
So that's a wrap up for this particular episode of The Aftermath. Make sure that you are liking, subscribing, sharing, and positively reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. Till next time,